This is the Better Ottawa podcast. My name is Neil Saravandamutu. Today is Monday, the 14th of April. We're here to talk about the last couple of weeks at Ottawa City Hall. And today we'll be covering the new, the most recent draft of the upcoming comprehensive zoning bylaw, the reliability of OC Transpo, pedestrian bridges in the winter, and fast-tracking shelters across the city. And we also have our lightning round where we will respond to any questions and comments that you've sent in. As always, I'm joined by John Willing. And for regular viewers, you'll know that Joanne Chianello is away for the month of April. So we have a very special guest with us today, Matthew Fleury. Of course, everyone will
former.
Well, everyone will remember that Matt is a former city councillor for Rideau Vanier and now with the University of Ottawa. So welcome, Matt.
I'm glad to be on. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I'm doing a great project at the university. Yeah. I've been following this podcast, and as I see there's a couple of housing themes on today, I'm excited because I'm doing work with the Alex Trebek Foundation. It's funded by the Alex Trebek Foundation. And my role is really to connect academics with government decision makers. And in the capital, we're looking at the public lands and how they're hopefully being transformed towards housing construction, particularly social housing construction.
Okay.
So working in that space, it's been interesting. Yeah, I left politics in 22. It's my third year and still recovering, isn't it?
You miss it? You miss politics?
Most days, not. No, with a young family, most days not. But yeah. You know, I'm still city passionate, and I think this forum's wonderful.
Well, thank
John,
you.
It's great to hear your voice.
And I assume you two are no strangers.
Yeah, I'm kind of preventing myself from calling you a counselor. Every time I see a former counselor, I'm always like, there's some counselors that popped into the campus here at Algonquin College, and I said, "Hey, counselor." Well, you're not a counselor. I'm a former counselor. So I'm going to just with Matt.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay, well, let's get started. So speaking of housing, and now 2 weeks ago, the planning committee looked at a second draft of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. And of course, the primary objective here is to get more housing built. Mm. So John, can you give us the 30,000 foot view of what's going on?
Yeah, the 30,000 views. So it's kind of like, might make your eyes gloss over at first, right? It's wonky planning policy, but this is
like 100 pages.
Well, yeah, it's it's a weekend read, probably a few weekends. But look, it's super important. It's one of the most important policy documents at City Hall. It's going to action what the overall vision of the official plan says, and that's what the zoning bylaw is all about. So, broad strokes, what does it mean for the average resident of the city? Well, I mean, the most interesting change would be the amount of density that would be allowed on a regular residential lot, a minimum of 4 units or more.
And so what we call 4 as of right.
As of right. So no application to rezone a property. So as of right. And that increases as we get closer to major corridors or near transit stations. No minimum parking requirements for developers creating new housing. A lot of the densification will happen near public transit, which is exactly what the city has been wanted for a long time. And the other thing is too, and a lot of residents and people listening to this podcast would have heard of 15-minute neighborhoods in the past. We've heard about this I guess slogan for a few years now. But the zoning is going to work to make sure that new neighborhoods or even maybe some existing neighborhoods can have that 15-minute walk for people to go from their home to amenities in the neighborhood.
Okay. Now, Councillor Brockington has said, and I quote, "The public has no idea the tsunami that's coming." Mm. So, Matt, can you tell us what this is going to look like in your old neighborhood of Rideau Vanier, or say an outer urban neighborhood like College Ward, or even a suburban ward like Canada?
Well, it's going to change and affect the city in different ways. In reality, in neighborhoods like Hintonburg, like Sandy Hill, Vanier, Overbrook, that change has happened and will continue to happen probably in the same. I mean, there'll be some minor tweaks to how the approvals happen. And there's some periphery communities, you think of like Overbrook and so on, that didn't necessarily have what was formerly called R3 or R4, which now will move to this new N zone, so N3, N4, which will increase the heights, the density, and the number of units. The outer suburban areas, like where there's greenfield, and you'd remember Jan would refer, like a lot of the new suburbs have that density.
Jan Harder, the former Barhaven councillor.
Yes. Yeah. Who was chair of planning for some time and worked in the early days of the official plan, would remind us in the urban area saying, the new developments in Greenfield have more density than some of those communities in and around the Greenbelt. And that's what Riley's really speaking about, is just on the inside of the Greenbelt from east to west, to south, and on the outer side, you're going to see some of those properties and communities that have these larger lots, single home. As of right, you have more, and now it's going to be tighter buildings closer together with more people. And that requires some agility relating to how does it work, right? Where do people park? Where are the amenities? Where are you putting your waste? So all that community logistics, snow storage.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what people, and the heights of those buildings, right? There's a lot of those buildings that are owner occupied. So even if the zoning allowed for more height today, you didn't see it as much because those owners have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. But in the Alta Vistas, in those types of community of the same age, you're going to see a lot more units, a lot of different heights, and that's going to affect the neighborhood. It's going to change the demographic. But look, as John was saying, there's an official plan. This is a guiding document. The zoning bylaw is the actual bricks and mortar of what can be done without more approvals. And I mean, you look at Edmonton, it's transforming Edmonton. What's been put in place for the housing upstarts. We'll see if you were seeing unlocks of certain neighborhoods because of these changes.
Yeah. Now, John, you talked about amenities, and what might this look like? I mean, are we talking about ice cream stores on every corner?
Bakeries, ice cream stores, coffee shops, daycares. But really, we
brewery
maybe some craft brewers. But we laugh, but I think really that's the idea. So people have these amenities in their neighborhoods rather than having to jump in their car, drive over to the next neighborhood or the neighborhood 3 neighborhoods over to find these amenities. And so that's really the goal. Now, look, the established neighborhoods, it's going to take some time perhaps for those neighborhoods to transform. But I think, the city would be looking at new neighborhoods that are a part of new developments to make them, 15-minute neighborhoods, and try to keep people, in their neighborhoods and spending their money at local stores and, taking their kids to local daycare. And it helps them too. So they're not driving all over the city trying to find these amenities.
Yeah. It's interesting. You think about Little Italy, and there's some streets back there, some that almost haven't changed for decades, where you've got this mixed use, and it's actually really pleasant.
Yeah, and I live, where I live in Hinterberg, and I think of Armstrong Street, where they've tried to bring in more commercial. I know there's one commercial frontage that has been for lease forever, but I know that's one street in our area that has been eyed for. How do we stitch in some commercial uses along this what's a straightaway, and add a little bit more vibrancy to that part of the neighborhood.
Yep. Okay. So one thing that I've realized, that whenever we're talking about development and zoning, the number one word that I hear when I listen to committee discussions, you know what it is, Matt?
Parking.
You've heard it many times. So that's always a big issue. And staff have talked about using a choice-based approach, meaning that if developers that are redeveloping a unit want to put in parking, they will, but if they don't, they won't. Some councillors have opposed this, that said, we need that minimum parking to make sure that I think the justification has been that it's impossible to get to this place without a car, so we need the parking. So how would you, why are these councillors going on about minimum parking?
Yeah, so John and I, when I started in 2010 and John was covering City Hall at that time, we had minimum parking requirements, which we regularly had to come to committee to waive, because it just didn't make sense. If you remember, particularly in Sandy Hill, there were student rental apartments, and the developer would say, even the visitor parking is not needed. And it was like this awkward dance with staff and the politics in the community when the issues were around garbage storage, amenity, front yard parking, snow storage, breakdowns of units to not make them bunkhouses, because that was a big issue at the time in Sandy Hill. I think there's a complex web of things. One is, it's the developer who pays the parking, and ultimately the buyer or the renter. It's in their lease, or it's in the price of the house. So because it's an economic factor, so if you want to provide parking, someone's paying for it. That's part of your model. If you don't want to provide parking, then that's also part of your model. So it depends the type of building you're building. It depends where it's at in the city. I saw one of the amendments that one of the councilors, I think it's Councillor Brown, that brought forward in rural zones where there's not even transit. You can't do the 15-minute neighborhood. Even the Stittsville Main Street might be 20-minute drive into to the area. So I get it. I get, like, you still need a car, but there's some areas in town where you live along Bank Street. Realistically, you could transit your way into a Farm Boy or a Cleaners or whatever you need. So there's not a perfect fit. So I think this sort of choice-based model does make sense. But there's some quirky things, like they're keeping visitor parking requirements, which I find odd. To me, when I have a visitor, they can park on street, and we should almost have city lots to pay for a longer time, or even private.
Well, you know what? Let's, John, I want to ask you about that, because one of the innovative proposals, you mentioned this, was the idea of communal parking lots.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that all about? And what sort of, why is this being proposed?
Yeah. So the idea is, if a developer might dedicate one part of his or her parcel to a communal parking space for the development, for the larger neighborhood too. So instead of requiring parking spots at each lot or each part of the development, they could centralize all the parking and use that space to put more units in, put more homes into those lots. Which, sounds like a great idea. I know, Neil, this is something that you've thought about too. I know one concern from the city has been businesses taking advantage of these neighborhood lots to allow customers to just come and park there. So to rely on those lots as their own commercial parking space, essentially.
I heard that, and I sort of challenged the city on that. Like, imagine you're Metro and you have this large parking lot, and I assume you're not open 24/7 because there's only a few of those stores in town. What's the issue with overnight parking for a tenant or a resident? Like, what's the issue with having multiple uses even on a commercial lot? It's like almost like a singular mindset where, like, well, I have a car and I live there, therefore I need an assigned spot, rather than this sort of parking permit model on private property. I kind of like that there's an economics of parking, and if the private retailer, I'm mentioning Metro, could be anything, can make money off of it and helps their bottom line and doesn't create another surface lot somewhere else, I think there's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, well, it actually reminds me of another point that I'm keeping an eye on with this zoning bylaw, and that's what I refer to as junk zoning. So this is, zoning that is there because it's been there forever, and it may or may not make any sense. I look at my own situation. We've got a property. It's got a side lot that we could develop, and we want to, but it's fairly skinny, and so we'd have to be pretty close to the property lines, which in that neighborhood, everyone's close to the property lines because it's an old neighborhood. But now, it'd have to be, the zoning would say you'd have to be 4 feet from the property line, and that just makes it, you just couldn't put a property in that's big enough. And likewise, the parking in front of the house has been prohibited in the past, even though everyone does it. Everyone does it. This is what what I'm looking for. Are we going to have this junk zoning that even though we're allowed to put 4 units as of right, can we realistically do it?
Yeah, with the visitor parking, it's an interesting question. I live in an area where there's 2 big towers going up. I'm not quite sure what the visitor parking is going to be, but there is concern in the neighborhood that those cars are going to park in on the streets, which is fine. It's not our parking. It's no one's parking. It's the city's parking. It's open to everyone. But that there's just going to create more traffic of cars looking for a place to park. And there's kids who live in this neighborhood and everything else. So, there's a trickle down effect when there isn't enough visitor parking on a lot, but I accept that we're trying to get people on transit. I live close to transit as well. So we hope that people will take the train or the bus to visit their friends and family at those large densified buildings.
Just to build on the junk zoning part of it, I've lived it in Sandy Hill when, the R4 sort of already pre-established a lot of the R4s. And that's one thing. It's very hard I was listening to Carol Reddy, and she did a tremendous job of presenting what is really complex. But every zone has subzones, often like A, B, C, D letters, and there's certain provisions. To me, I sort of question if the city defines what the setbacks are, front yard, side yard, and height. If I'd much care about diversity of units in a building then who cares that it's 10 or 12 units? And the city seems like there's some agreement of saying, well, 10 units max. And I kind of challenge, like, to me, that's junk zoning in the sense it's much more, it's the amenities, it's how it fits in the neighborhood, it's the quality of the materials that meet the character of the neighborhood. So, units is only one factor. And if the envelope allows for that same building, but you have 12 units or 14 units, and economically you can use a community benefit through that, I don't like that it's so stringent as a starting point. But I recognize there's a big difference between 10 units and 40 units. You gotta find a spot at some point.
Yeah. Okay. I want to move on, but I've got one last question for you, Matt, on zoning and your experience, because this is the second of 3 drafts of the zoning bylaw. The third and final draft comes in December, and I think the council votes on it in January. So how much of this is kind of waiting for that final draft, and it's going to be an arm wrestle around the council table in January?
Well, listening to council members, and it was a joint committee of planning and rural affairs, a lot of the folks understand where we're going. And it's been a series of official plan. The zoning bylaws in this new term, the official plan was in my former term, pre-2022. So a lot of councillors have been engaged. I saw motions and directions. So I assume that staff and councillors and communities will be working together on those fine details. And as John highlighted earlier in our conversation, a lot of communities are already writing, as you said, oh, there's an issue in this subzone or there's an issue in that subzone. Can we get that? So I feel like there's continued compromise until you get to a product. Ultimately, as I understand it, early 2026, we'll get a final zoning bylaw, which then becomes the law. And we'll see how influential it is to drive up new housing starts.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem, the debate doesn't seem hot right now around the council table, but to Councillor Brockman's point, kind of going back to where we started here, the tsunami, it's not until you see these changes happen on your street, that's when people really start calling the councillors' offices and wondering, why is this person allowed to do this? Oh, it's as of right, as of 2026. So that's where the interesting tsunami will hit, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to transit. Now, transit committee met this past week. They met for 5.5 hours. I hope those of you that watch this on YouTube watch it at 2 times speed. And there was about 5 issues that came up. The big one was reliability, which we're going to talk about. But before we do that, I want to talk about 4 other issues that came up and want to hear if you guys got any reaction to any of them. Okay. So number 1 was we've got the new ways to bus. That's going to start on the 27th of April. So coming up soon. And it's a major overhaul of the bus route. And I think virtually every bus route is changing. The vast majority of them are changing.
100, I think.
Yeah. So it's going to be a huge change for riders, right? So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is we heard about there's going to be a weekend of free transit at some point. We don't know when yet, but I want to hear if you got any thoughts on that. Number 3 is there's a shortage of buses and mechanics, which have serious consequences for our ability to provide the service that we set out to provide. And there does not appear to be, I wouldn't say a very robust plan for how we address either the shortage of buses or the shortage of mechanics. And then number 4 is we heard about OC Transpo's 5-year plan. And this is the second time I've heard them refer to their slogan as proud to be your choice to get there. I actually had an op-ed in the Ottawa Citizen today, and I say that the reality is that right now, if there's a choice, transit is unfortunately the last choice. I would love it to be the first choice. I would love it to be the best choice, but we're not there yet. So before we jump into reliability, do you guys have any thoughts on these 4 issues?
Well, I'll go first, and I'll take the easy one. It's the free transit weekend, which I find interesting. I was listening to Councillor Sean Menard ask management about, and he was joking, like, can we make the weekend including Friday too? I'd love to see Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So Councillor Menard's weekend includes Friday, I guess.
Maybe on a Monday, holiday Monday too.
But he actually mentioned too, he was asking because the Ottawa Senators are about to go into the playoffs, and he was wondering about when this free weekend is going to be. Wouldn't it be great, he suggested, if it happened when the Sens were playing a home game? Yeah, but boy, are you putting the pressure on OC Transport to deliver on that service. No jokes. Remember the one year, I think the train went down on New Year's Eve or something like that when it was free. Yeah. And so you get a lot of heat put on you if you don't, answer the bell and provide a really, really solid transit service. So that would put a lot of pressure on Transpo, but they might not avoid it. If they're looking at a free weekend soon, it might fall on Ottawa Center's playoff night.
A lot of organization, right? When you think of staff overtime
yeah.
and bus reliability.
Yeah.
I'm when I look at the numbers, there's a couple of things that they're linked to what you're saying, but it kind of surprised me. One is I know they're changing 100 routes, and I know they have a plan, and you see it, find out. The only reason why I keep on top of it or knowledge is that at every bus stop, there's these flags that are covered, right? And you kind of like, what's under that flag? One day you sort of want to bring my hockey stick and kind of like see if I could see what number or, So I think there's that moment of when will they unsolve those? I think the fact that René's talking about a dashboard and KPIs is starting to be interesting to me of how they report delays and cancellation. Because if not, you're sort of waiting all the time on these data points, and sometimes they're months to years later. When if this dashboard could be a monthly set of data that you can track over time, that you could see, is OC Transpo doing better? Are they doing worse? Is there a new pressure point? Then like the public can kind of see that transparency. I know I had done some work relating to shelter use in Ottawa, and there's a dashboard in housing and homelessness. So you see how many families, how many individuals, and those who are in the space doing research, they love it because it gives them a trend of where are we going? How many people are in tents? How many individuals? How many newcomers? So it gives you, so hopefully OC gets to that. When I looked at the bus, it was interesting data. They want to be at 700. I wrote it down because so they have 735 buses.
Yeah.
To run the day, they need 540 buses in the day. And right now they're at 521 buses. So they're short every day. Just to start the day, they're canceling 19 routes. That's a stressful, you got to think about it in that perspective, right? There's 19 routes you're canceling. So there's that has nothing to do with congestion, with, a bus breaks down. This is just the way the calendar goes out. There's 19 routes that are not happening because they don't have the buses. So that raises a ton of questions, like how do they get there? Is it an issue of mechanics, parts? Yeah. I know they've said that the EV buses have not come as quickly as they thought. So, but I think, that's a dangerous curve, especially we're very fortunate that the LRT has been reliable in the last year. But if ever something was to happen and you get a closure, then you have R1s. Well, that number starts to draw even more buses.
Everyone suffers across the city.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk more about reliability. And in fact, so John, we saw a dashboard on this as Matt was mentioning. So how did, we have this sort of 99.5% number where we hear that reliability is like 96%. And everyone's like, wow, is it really? So what's going on with reliability?
So there's a lot of metrics that they use. And to Matt's point, I'm glad they're thinking more about sharing this information with the public. There was a time where they were starting to, maybe just after you were elected, Matt, like they're starting to push out a little bit more information about the transit service. And then I found that they stopped and rolled it back because all attention went to LRT and what the heck was going on there. And then all this great information sharing was put on pause. So I hope, to your point, that they do have a dashboard so that we can get regular monthly updates on the 12-month averages and this kind of thing. So going back to, I wrote everything out here because there's a lot of numbers we're going to throw at listeners here and viewers when it comes to reliability. So yes, bus service on average, 97.6 of trips delivered over 12 months ending in March. They have a target of 99.5. So that's one problem, I guess. And they use these three terms when it comes to describe punctuality. They have something called regularity that relates to the frequent bus routes. And they have punctuality that they describe for less frequent bus routes. Okay. So punctuality, let's talk about regularity first, right? The frequent bus routes, they're hitting 82% right now compared with an 85% target. So they're down there. Punctuality, so the neighborhood routes, they're at 74% compared to an 85% target. And within that, this is interesting because they consider punctuality to be if they're not punctual, if a bus arrives more than 1 minute early, or if a bus arrives more than 5 minutes late.
Hey, John, can I just stop you there for a sec? 5 minutes late. Is that a reasonable indicator for punctuality?
It's late, but I always think
Like that's getting to time on work or not, like whether you get to work on time or not.
the more damning ones are the early ones, I think, because a bus arrives early and you expect it to show up, but you're seeing the tail light down the street. And so that's always been the biggest, I think anyway, the biggest frustration. But to that point, 10% of the trips arrive more than 1 minute early in the past 12 months on average, and 16% of trips arrive more than 5 minutes late.
So that's where I'm interested, right? The 16%, because 16% is 1 every 5 trip is later than 5 minutes. That's I mean that's a lot of trips in the city, and I recognize there's a whole lot of reasons.
I'm glad you bring that up because they presented these 3 metrics for measuring reliability, and that's great. The more data we can get, the better, and the more transparency is what we need to fix the system. But I think the question people are asking is, what is the probability that my bus is going to be there on time, right? And so is there a way to combine these metrics into one to answer that question?
People want to just know where their bus is. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's so simple. Like I take the bus around from work to home often, and connect with LRT, and I just want to know when's that bus going to come? Where should I look up? They want a degree of predictability. And
When should I run to the stop?
When should I run to the stop?
Yeah.
And I always say, if your bus is running in mixed traffic, there is no telling when your bus is going to arrive. You don't know what the traffic's going to be like. You don't know if there's going to be an accident, construction, et cetera, et cetera.
Think about it like Uber. We've all used the app.
Yep.
The driver's on his way 5 minutes, and then the driver's a minute away. We really need that sort of data. It's less. I remember, this is dating me back pre-LRT, but I remember asking, why do we still have the paper copy at bus stops? Because that sets kind of a assumed time. So then you have a point there, you have a point on the app, you had, an assumed point. So I think that's part of the overall challenge is like, what is the reference point? If it just went to the app and your next bus is in 20 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, whatever it is.
Real time.
Yeah. That would be.
Yeah. And through the app called Transit, we can do that. However, we end up with these phantom buses that disappear. And that's something I've never really understood. How is it that a bus can be there and then you look a minute later and suddenly it's no longer scheduled?
That must be the joy of the interlining system that we have, where buses, I don't know. I'm just speculating here, Matt. You might have more inside knowledge on this, but like if a bus is needed somewhere else, they'll change routes and send it to a route where it's needed at that time.
There's not like a single answer. I think it's if there's a bus that's assumed to come in 5 minutes, then it's tracking it somewhere, and on the app it's showing it. That bus at some point might be canceled. It might be late. And that's where the ghost bus might have never started, right? But I thought OC fixed that. I haven't been, at the table for 3 years now. So, but yeah, all that to say, and I agree with your point, Neil, which is, and John's point, data is relevant because then we have conversations. We can understand the pain points of OC Transpo. As much transparency on the monthly, as much transparency on the struggles of getting buses on the road and so on, I think makes everyone understand their business. I think makes them then be accountable to the decision they're making. We're investing more in OC Transpo. Here's why we have to hire mechanics. Here's why we have to purchase new buses. Here's why.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is pedestrian bridges. And I want to go through them a little faster than we took a lot of time on those last 2 topics.
They're spicy topics.
They were
meaty topics.
They were,
okay.
But this next one is dear to my heart. So this weekend, 2 pedestrian bridges opened for the season. So that we had the Chief William Commanda Bridge over the Ottawa River. We also had the pedestrian bridge that connects Carleton University and Vincent Massey Park. So John, a few years ago, the city opened the staircase on the Corkstown Bridge and on the Flora Footbridge over the canal. Previously, those staircases were closed and you had to take the long way down.
Oh, I know.
So John, what's going on here? Why is it that the city cannot keep these bridges open year round?
Well, so I think it's 2 different issues here with both of those bridges. So the Commander Bridge, now this is according to the city. Don't boo me from home. This is according to the city. They're concerned about the salt and the grit and plowing, which is a wood surface on the Commander Bridge. it would essentially ruin the bridge, according to the city. For the bridge over the Rideau River, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the city's explanation is the NCC wasn't maintaining part of its own pathway that connects off the bridge. So that's why we're not going to winter maintain this bridge right now. So that's the rationale. Now, when it comes to the Commanda Bridge, I remember when I first started writing about the story about the city pursuing this link with Gatineau, that it was going to be
The old Prince of Wales.
That's right. The old Prince of Wales became the Commanda. And I know cross-country skiers were really excited about the prospect of being able to cross-country ski over the bridge into two cities, into two provinces. And it was really, really interesting to do like a ski loop. But that never came to fruition. But it doesn't sound like it's off the table per se. So maybe something in the future.
And Matt, if I understand correctly, you're a member of the board of one of these winter trails. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm on the Rideau Winter Trail board. We start at Donald and Adaway Bridge, and we go all the way to Bank Street. Okay. And as a pilot groom this year, we went from Bank Street, follow the RA route all the way to Vincent Massey. Okay. So we did it, I believe, 2 grooms in that section. So we engage with the councillors, Councillor Brockington, Councillor Menard, and Carleton University. I think there's opportunities. Like I think Carleton, they have a contractor for their own site. Could they do it? Then who covers the liability? Like it was the first year, like we were grooming, like we were piloting something in that area. I think there's appetite. I'm impressed by this council and I know it's always easy to pick the infrastructure components that aren't working, but for years and years as a local councillor, I tried to get those stairs at Corktown Bridge between Centertown to Ottawa done because we've all walked through that. People would jump the fence would be moved. Mm-hmm. People would it's the easiest, fastest route. And, I think the mayor and local councillors work closely with staff. What happens in my understanding of the past is that city staff are behind machinery in the winter ops, sidewalk plow, the bigger plows, and they contract all hand plow, and hand shoveling staircases and emergency exits and so on. So it's in that contract speak. I know it seems like it's doable. I think it is, and obviously it is because Flora and Corktown have improved. So, but there's a fundamental question, right? Of why do these close down in the winter? It's a bit the sort of ego of Ottawa, right? Where the city fund forgot. Do we roll the carpets at 5 p.m.? Do we close the bridges in the winter? It's kind of. I agree that it doesn't feel good because, like, especially now, people are out and about post this pandemic era. The urban life with the canal, like this winter's canal was a wonderful example of people coming to that zone and how those bridges are so important.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys, in all of your years at City Hall, covering City Hall, we often hear that one of the big issues is liability. You mentioned this, Matt. Have you guys ever seen a big liability claim come to the city? Like, is this a real concern or is it just a theoretical one?
Well, part of my job as City Hall beat reporter is I walked across the courthouse a lot to check lawsuits against the city. So just because you don't hear about them doesn't mean they don't exist. Yeah. And so, they're sitting there over there in the courthouse. And some claims that don't go through like the court process come to the city through its own claims process too. So I don't know the numbers, but I think, the city is worried about liability. And we talked about salt recently, right, Neil, on the pod before, and why is the city using so much salt? Yeah. Maybe that factors into it as well.
Okay.
There's a lot of claims. Okay. There's a lot of injuries with potholes, with buses, with routes. So it's not an excuse not to do it. It's how do you organize that risk? And I think what they've done with Corktown and Flora works. So there's they're good examples.
Okay. Our fourth topic, I'm going to move up to the lightning round. Ooh. So I'm going to give you guys each a minute on this topic, and it's about shelters. So planning committee discussed fast tracking the permitting of shelters to as a permitted land use anywhere in the city or in the urban part of the city, and I should say in the within the urban boundary of the city. And so it's already part of the comprehensive zoning bylaw that we talked about earlier. So it's going to be coming forward in January regardless. But the city is fast tracking it, and so some community groups have pushed back on this, saying that we do not want shelters throughout the city, and they're probably talking about their neighborhood. So John, what is going on here when we're talking about putting shelters anywhere?
Well, it's not just when people sometimes think of shelters, they think of big multi-story boxes with beds in them, which is not true. A lot of like smaller, I've used my air quotes, shelters are transitional homes. They look like regular homes on the outside. People that maybe a family, even families, are staying inside. So I think that's what the city's talking about. Not big box shelters per se, but smaller homes that have maybe multi-rooms inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Carty House, and it's unclear to me, like Carty House and Matthew House, and they do great work. I don't believe they're called shelters. So I think they're called domiciliary hostel rooming houses. But I agree with John that those are in communities already with minimal issues. What's the issue is the larger congregate setting, lots of services in and around a space like what we saw on Montreal Road. To me, the issue is it's much more one of policy. Like the city and its housing and homelessness plan wants to move away from managing homelessness and actually build housing.
Okay.
Well, it's got to stay consistent.
Okay. Next topic is John. So Councillor Kavanaugh withdrew her motion to remove Taywin from the official plan, from the official plan. So one thing that surprised me, Councillor Gower submitted an inquiry to staff to comment on the claims that were in that motion. So I'm just wondering, like, any sense about why this motion was removed and what Councillor Gower is hoping to get out of this inquiry?
We'd always used to groan at press row when a motion turned into an inquiry. Like, oh, they neutered it. Oh, gosh. Again, we're not going to get a debate. But maybe it gives...
You mean Joanne, right?
I mean, all of us here at press row will be nameless. Anyway, I think, look, we talked recently on the pod about this council. I think this is this council's first opportunity to talk about Taywin, and maybe this bureaucracy's first time to really look at it. Yeah. We have a new city manager at this point now compared to the last time Taywin was before council. So maybe this is an opportunity for city staff to take a look with fresh eyes, and maybe Mayor Sutcliffe to have a chance to take a deep dive on it as well.
Okay. So Matt, one item that kind of flew under the radar, but I think it's quite important, is forthcoming updates to the official plan that have to align with the provincial planning statement.
Policy statement.
Policy statement.
PPS.
Thank you. PPS. Yes. So that's where the province says, this is what we want housing to look like. And so municipalities, you have to conform with this plan. And one of them was, quite the controversial move to allow developers to request expansions to the urban boundary whenever they want, whereas before it used to be consolidated to every 5 years. My question for you, Matt, is with this provincial action, has the city lost its ability to control essentially urban sprawl?
I think so. I think even the urban boundary debate is a bit of a lost, the municipality's lost on what it can do. John would remember some of the conversations from Mr. Willis at the time, Stephen Willis, who talked about we need to see more infill within the green belt and trying to manage the ratio of 50-50, right? 50% of new homes should be within the green belt, while 50 will remain in greenfield. This province sort of feels like it just wants housing. It doesn't care where it comes or how it comes. And greenfield housing for certain developments is easier, although as you've rightly described it, it's expensive. Someone's got to put that road in, that underground sewer, and we all collectively pay for that growth. Unfortunately, development's supposed to pay for its own growth, and it's not happening. So, to me, it's an involvement again by the Ford government in municipal jurisdiction, but it shows its color and it has full legitimacy because it's been recently reelected.
Yep. Okay. End of lightning round. So, City Council is meeting on Wednesday. Is there anything on that agenda or other committees that are happening this week that have caught your eye to either of you?
I like looking at things that are completely off the radar, and I'm looking at the Ottawa Fire Services annual report that's coming to a Protective Services Committee. And, the number of fires have gone up every year since 2020, which I find really interesting. I know that the city is growing, but I'm curious to know, what is that going to mean for funding the fire department and stations and everything else. Sometimes these small annual reports, there's really interesting stories in there. So I don't know if there's going to be questions from councillors, but we'll see.
Okay. How about you, Matt?
A surplus, $51 million. How will that be spent? A lot of it will be going to OC Transpo, spending more money on paramedics, and then obviously the reserves. The other report that caught my eye, maybe more with the period, is the Economic Development Strategy and Action Plan. And it's really focused for me on two areas. One is this Knight Commissioner. Is there an influence of investment money? But the other one's tariffs. The mayor's done a lot of work in trying to bring people together on what does that mean for Ottawa, try to bring in Gatineau in those conversations. So how will that kind of spark up some initiatives relating to local economy, maybe main streets, maybe some particular industries or sectors?
Okay. You know, there's one item I saw in the news today, and it's for council on Wednesday. Your successor, Stephanie Plante, is bringing a motion to council to say that basically to say we as a city need to do more on getting family doctors here. You'll remember that the city of Kingston has offered incentives to bring family doctors to come and set up and have been quite successful in it. So I think the motion is going to be, can the city do more to get family doctors here in Ottawa? So I'm curious to see how that discussion goes.
I think it's dangerous when municipal council get into areas that they're not responsible for. I don't think Ottawa has a primary doctor access challenge like smaller communities, particularly in the north and far east. But I can understand why Stephanie's doing it, and I can understand the political. In politics, you want to help people, right? And so whatever the issue might be, I've been in those spaces before. So let's see what it comes out and if there's local solutions.
Well, I've just learned yesterday my family doctor is retiring. So I will be listening to Councillor Plante's motion and our argument around council.
No walk-ins for you.
Good luck, John.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Anyone out there? Oh.
Okay, Henry, can you move us over here, please? Thank you. So listen, that's it for this week. I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks
and John for being here as always.
Good to see everyone.
As always, please leave us a comment on Substack or on YouTube or wherever you find the podcast. Any questions or comments you have, we'll be happy to pick them up in our next recording. We're actually going to take a week off for the Easter holiday, so we will be back in 2 weeks. Finally, I'd like to thank my producer and our producer, Henry Allen, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Have a great 2 weeks, and we'll see you soon.
Happy Easter.